Hi, I'm David Judson, Editor-in-Chief of Stratfor. With me today are George Friedman, Stratfor's founder and chairman. Also joining us today is Jay Ogilvy, founder of the Global Business Network, and now, since the beginning of the year, a contributor to Stratfor. We're going to do something a bit different, and I hope not too abstract today, but I want to talk to both of you about your respective disciplines, geopolitical forecasting, in Stratfor's case, scenario thinking or scenario planning, in the case of the Global Business Network. The sort of fundamental assumption of geopolitical forecasting is that relations between nation states are fundamentally predictable. The driving assumption of your realm is that almost nothing is predictable. So what are we doing here, guys? I think it'd be fun to explore and interesting to explore the ways these two disciplines converge and diverge. Since you're from out of town, I'll give you the first shot at exploring the two.
Okay. The most obvious difference in the two you've hit on already. That a basic premise of scenario thinking is that the future is fundamentally unpredictable. And there's a lot of thought that goes behind that in terms of the nature of time. Are we in a kind of block universe, that Newtonian, billiard balls that always behave the same way? Or are we in a fundamentally crazy universe that is fundamentally unpredictable? While there is that difference between scenario thinking and geopolitical forecasting, I think more significant are the similarities. One, we cover the same beat, the globe. Two, I think you've been quite eloquent, George, about looking for what's in plain sight, that you don't have to do espionage, that open source work will give you a lot that's very, very important and significant. Three, I think we're utterly in agreement about the importance of global forces as opposed to individual personalities. I wrote a book some time ago that opened with the conceit of the death of the presidency in the same way that Nietzsche talked about the death of God. I'm not talking about the literal lying down dead, but rather we no longer live in that kind of hierarchical structure where there is a single captain of the ship, but many forces that are pushing us this way and that. So let me stop there.
Okay.
Well, from our point of view, quite apart from geopolitics, we take the position of Adam Smith, of the invisible hand, that it's not human intentionality that governs, but the sum total of actions of human beings lead in certain directions, and that under certain impulses and certain pressures and certain constraints, you can predict that. Economics doesn't debate that. They believe that, and I think to some extent it's true. But the idea doesn't originate with Adam Smith. It originates with Machiavelli. And with Machiavelli's idea that if you're going to be a prince, there's a certain way you're going to behave, and it's predictable. And if you're not going to behave that way, you're going to be dead. So this is a guide to a prince who had better know this anyway, but I'll tell him. And it's that idea that if you are going to climb to the presidency of the United States or to the presidency of any country, if you're going to take power, you're going to have to behave in a certain way. And that way is not unpredictable, because if you behave in a certain way, you'll fail. And in a hierarchy going upward, you come to the idea that when you have 300 million people, the idea that one person simply decides what's going to happen is preposterous. But when you have 300 million people, the idea that you just can't figure out where 300 million people are going is confusing. I don't think we disagree that much. I would argue that going into the office of a general or a CEO and saying, I have 6 possible outcomes and getting paid strikes me as hard. I mean, they'll want to know which one. But you have mastered the craft of giving multiple scenarios and showing us which becomes more likely. And in that we merge.
Yeah. In our scenario work, we try fairly hard to not pick the most likely. We try to construct a set of scenarios in such a way that, say there are 4 of them, we often do on a 2x2 matrix, and we will calibrate the axes such that we really believe that all four are equiprobable. But then once we've done that, a big part of our methodology involves getting from four scenarios to one strategy. Four scenarios may be a beautiful thing. Four strategies are not.
The problem of the human condition is that you have to choose. We all live in the future. I'm sure Yogi Berra said something about that. But the point is that we don't have the luxury as we go forward of not choosing a profession, not choosing a spouse. And in all of these choices, we make decisions on what is more or less likely. When we step back from it, it's not all that random. And when we look at large numbers as opposed to small numbers, the randomness begins to dissolve. And that allows you to say, this is the likely path that these many people, 300 million or what have you, are going to take. It's a logic of numbers, but it's also a logic of constraints. We each, in retrospect, as we get to our age, we look back and see all the choices that we thought we had, that in fact we didn't. It led to us to where we are.
Is it possible to think about these two different disciplines in a way that's complementary? What I mean by this is we focus at Stratfor on the narrow band, if that's the right word, of relations between nation states. In your realm, you're looking at a lot more data sets, if that's the right word. That we're dealing with a smaller number of data sets inherently seems to make our task simpler than yours.
Possibly, but one of the things I've been impressed by in what I've read from Stratfor and in your books, George, while the big word is geopolitics, you don't ignore economics, you don't ignore culture. I appreciate the way you talk about people's passions.
Well, geopolitics is, for me, an overarching thing. Part of it is economics, part of it is politics and war. I don't understand how I can understand anything if I pretend that economics is separate from politics.
Right.
And the passions that people have are both things that are driven and things that get created by the circumstances you're in. So understanding those passions is crucial. And understanding the unity of things is crucial. And it's out of drawing them together that you begin to see certain patterns that you can extrapolate from or draw curves from, whatever you feel you have to do. But that I don't think is that different from what you do.
I was saying to David earlier that I think one of the ways our work complements one another is that it's possible to take a Stratfor geopolitical forecast and regard it as what we like to call the official future, and then look for off-ramps. The off-ramps would be the alternative scenarios. And I think decision makers, chief executive officers, want to know the off-ramps even as they commit to a single course of action.
We call that falsification. Some of our forecasts are wrong. It's at what moment do you realize they're wrong? And of course, the danger is clinging to it. What we don't do is say, okay, I've got this other possible path. I've made a mistake on this path. It's not going to happen. Let me begin to reconstruct something new. So the difference is you have an off-ramp. I have a failure point. And in the end, we're trying to reconstruct the world anyway.
And another piece of commonality, part of our vocabulary, we premise our work on the unpredictability of the future. We acknowledge that every now and again we'll come across something we will call a predetermined element. So the predetermined elements are indeed predictable. They're in place. As many scenarios as you want to draw, that one it keeps showing up in each of the scenarios. So when you can find one of those, we're in the prediction game.
We just find more of them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a big topic with a small amount of time, but I really appreciate you both coming in here to try and unravel some of this mystery for us. Thank you for joining us here at Stratfor.